Dr. Katie Reed had seen a lot of things in her 15 years as a xenobiologist and veterinarian on the frontier colony of New Horizon. She treated wounded settlers, patched up alien livestock from a dozen different worlds, and once even performed emergency surgery on a Centauri trader's pet that looked like a floating jellyfish. But nothing had prepared her for the emergency call that came through on that cold Tuesday morning. "We've got something big at the eastern perimeter," the security chief's voice crackled through her communicator. "Real big. And it's dying." Katie grabbed her medical kit and rushed to the transport vehicle. Her assistant Tom was already waiting, his face pale. During the ride out, he kept checking his scanner nervously. "What is it?" Katie asked. Tom swallowed hard. "Readings say it's a Drakari." Katie's hands tightened on her medical bag. A Drakari. She'd only seen them in databases and old galactic records. They were ancient creatures, dragon-like beings that most species in the galaxy avoided. Powerful. Intelligent. Dangerous. Some said they were the first spacefaring species in the known universe. When they arrived at the site, Katie understood Tom's fear. The creature was massive, easily 20 feet from snout to tail. Obsidian scales covered its body, shimmering with an otherworldly beauty even through the blood and burns that marked its hide. Deep gashes ran along its sides. Scorch marks from energy weapons covered its wings. This dragon had been through a war. "Director, we can't waste medical supplies on this," Tom said quietly, pulling her aside. "That's a Drakari. They're dangerous. Unpredictable. And look at the damage. We'd need weeks of supplies just to stabilize it." Katie looked at the dying creature. The colony was already running low on medical resources. They were 3 months from the next supply shipment. Using their supplies on this creature could mean putting her own people at risk if an emergency happened. It was logical to let nature take its course. But Katie had never been good at logic when a patient was suffering. She knelt beside the dragon, setting down her kit. The creature's breathing was shallow, labored. Its scales, which should have been smooth and brilliant, were dull with pain. As she moved closer, one golden eye flickered open. It focused on her with an intelligence that took her breath away. This wasn't just an animal. This was a person. In that golden eye, Katie saw pain. Deep, overwhelming grief. And something else, desperation. Then the images came. It started as a pressure in her mind, gentle but insistent. The Drakari was telepathic. Katie had read about this ability but never experienced it. Suddenly, she wasn't seeing through her own eyes anymore. She saw a nest hidden in an asteroid field. 3 small forms, baby dragons with scales that gleamed like starlight. She felt the mother's pride, her fierce protective love. Then the raiders came. Ships with no markings. Energy weapons tearing through rock and scale. The mother fighting with everything she had, but there were too many. When the smoke cleared, 3 small bodies lay still. The images faded. Katie gasped, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. This mother had fled across hostile space, wounded and broken, looking for somewhere to die. And somehow she'd found the human colony. "No," Katie whispered, touching the dragon's snout gently. The scales were warm beneath her fingers. "Not today. I've got you." Tom grabbed her shoulder. "Katie, think about this. If we use our supplies, then we use them," Katie said firmly. She'd taken an oath when she became a veterinarian. All life deserves a chance. It didn't matter if that life had scales or fur, tentacles or feathers. "Get the trauma kit. The big one. And bring every coagulant pack we have." "The colony board won't approve this," Tom warned. "Then they can fire me later," Katie replied, already running her scanner over the dragon's wounds. "Right now, I've got a patient who needs help." The dragon's golden eyes met hers again. In her mind, Katie felt something. A word, a concept, a name. Velrea. The dragon was called Velrea. "Okay, Velrea," Katie said softly, preparing her first injection. "This is going to hurt, but I promise you'll make it through. You're not alone anymore." As Katie began to work, Velrea's eyes slowly closed. For the first time in days, the ancient dragon slept without fear. Above them, the sun rose over New Horizon, marking the beginning of a bond that would change the fate of the entire galaxy. 6 weeks had passed since Katie brought Velrea to the medical facility, and the colony was still buzzing with nervous energy. Every day, people would gather outside the reinforced medical wing, watching through the observation windows as the massive dragon slowly healed. Some were curious. Others were terrified. The colony board had held 3 emergency meetings about whether keeping a Drakari was too dangerous. Katie didn't care about any of it. She spent every waking hour caring for her patient. The first week had been the hardest. Velrea's wounds were severe, and her body chemistry was unlike anything Katie had encountered. Standard treatments didn't work. She had to improvise, adjust, and sometimes just guess. There were nights when she thought they'd lose her. Nights when Velrea's breathing became so shallow that Katie sat beside her, holding her massive claw, whispering encouragement. "Come on, girl," Katie would say. "You've survived worse than this. Don't give up now." And somehow Velrea held on. By the third week, the dragon could lift her head. By the fifth week, she could move around the large medical bay they'd cleared for her. The wounds were closing. The burns were healing. But Katie noticed something else. Velrea's eyes still held that deep sadness. Physical wounds could heal, but grief was different. So Katie started staying later. After her other duties were done, after Tom and the rest of the staff went home, Katie would pull up a chair beside Velrea and just talk. At first she wasn't sure if it helped. But the dragon would turn her head toward Katie, those golden eyes focused and attentive. "You know," Katie said one evening, her voice quiet in the empty medical bay, "I lost my daughter 5 years ago. Her name was Lily. She was 7. The words came easier in the darkness, with only Velrea listening. Katie hadn't talked about Lily in years. It hurt too much. But somehow, sitting beside this grieving mother, the words just flowed. It was a transport accident. Shuttle malfunctioned during a colony supply run. She was visiting her grandmother on the station. Katie's voice cracked slightly. They said it was instant. That she didn't suffer. I guess that's supposed to make it better, but it doesn't. Not really. She felt Velrea's consciousness brush against her mind, gentle, careful, like a comforting hand on her shoulder. Everyone told me to move on, Katie continued. To be strong. To focus on my work. And I did. I threw myself into this job, treating every patient like they were the most important thing in the universe. But you know what? I think I understand now. I wasn't just treating them. I was trying to save something I couldn't save before. Through their telepathic connection, Katie felt Velrea's response. Not words exactly, but feelings. Understanding. Shared pain. Gratitude. Over the following days, Velrea began sharing her own story. Through images and emotions, Katie learned about Drakari culture. They were ancient, one of the first species to travel the stars. They lived for thousands of years, but they could only bear young 3 times in their entire lives. Each egg was precious beyond measure. Velrea had waited 2 centuries before having her first clutch. Another 300 years before the second. And her last 3 eggs, the ones the raiders destroyed, had been her final chance at legacy. In Drakari culture, your children carried your memory forward across the ages. Without them you were truly alone. Katie also learned something surprising. The rest of the galaxy saw humans as weak. Prey animals, Velrea showed her through their connection. Emotional and soft. Playing at civilization with borrowed technology. Most species tolerated humans because they were useful traders, but few respected them. That's ridiculous, Katie said aloud, slightly offended. We've built colonies on 40 worlds. We've survived wars, plagues, and disasters. We're not weak. Through their bond, Katie felt Velrea's agreement. The dragon had been confused at first. Why would this fragile human risk so much for a stranger? Why would she sacrifice her colony's resources? Why would she sit here night after night, keeping vigil over a creature that could kill her with one swipe? Then Velrea understood. It wasn't weakness that drove Katie. It was a different kind of strength. Humans felt deeply, loved fiercely, and refused to abandon those who suffered. That wasn't prey behavior. That was the heart of a warrior wearing a different kind of armor. One morning, as Katie was checking Velrea's wing injuries, the dragon did something unexpected. She pressed her massive claw gently against Katie's palm. Katie watched in amazement as a single obsidian scale detached from Velrea's chest. It floated down, landing on Katie's skin. The moment it touched her, Katie gasped. The scale burned, not painfully but with intense heat, melting into her palm. When the sensation faded, a perfect scale-shaped mark remained, black as midnight against her skin. What does this mean? Katie asked, staring at her hand. Velrea's voice filled her mind, clearer than ever before. It means you are family. In my culture we bond only once. We choose one being in all the universe to call kin. I choose you, Katie Reed. Katie felt tears streaming down her face. Why me? Because you showed me that strength comes in many forms. Velrea's thoughts were warm, wrapping around Katie like a blanket. You gave me a reason to live when I had none. Family is forever. And I will never forget this debt. Katie pressed her marked palm against Velrea's snout, feeling the warmth of the dragon's scales. In that moment, human and Drakari were no longer two separate beings. They were family. And family always protected each other. 3 months after that terrible day when Velraya had arrived half dead at New Horizon, the dragon stood at the colony's main landing field. She was magnificent. Her obsidian scales gleamed in the morning sun, fully healed and radiant. Her wings, which had been torn and burned, now stretched wide and powerful. She looked like something out of an ancient legend. Katie stood beside her, trying to keep her emotions in check. The scale mark on her palm felt warm, pulsing gently like a second heartbeat. Over the past weeks, as Velraya grew stronger, Katie had known this day was coming. Dragons weren't meant to stay in one place. But knowing something and accepting it were two different things. "You have to go," Katie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you do." Through their bond, she felt Velraya's sadness mixed with something else. Duty, perhaps. Or destiny. "My kind wander the void between stars," Velraya's voice echoed in Katie's mind. "We do not settle. We do not build colonies like your people do. The darkness of space is our home, the distant nebulas our resting places. I have already stayed longer than any Drakari has stayed in one location in centuries." Katie nodded, wiping at her eyes quickly. Half the colony had gathered to watch the departure. Some still looked nervous around Velraya, but most had come to see her as Katie did, not as a monster but as a person. A mother who had lost everything. "Will I ever see you again?" Katie asked. Velraya lowered her massive head, touching her snout gently to Katie's forehead. The gesture was tender, impossibly gentle for such a powerful creature. "The scale bond connects us across any distance," Velraya said. "You will always feel my presence and I will feel yours. When you need me I will know. And Katie Reed, I want you to understand something." Katie looked up into those golden eyes. "Your species is young. In galactic terms, humans are children. The other races dismiss you as soft, emotional, weak. Prey animals playing at civilization with technology you barely understand. I have heard them speak of humanity this way for decades." Katie felt a flash of anger at that, but Velraya continued. "But I have learned the truth. Humanity's compassion is not weakness. Your ability to feel, to care for those you barely know, to sacrifice for strangers, this is a strength that makes the very stars bend. The galaxy does not understand this yet. But they will. One day they will." With that, Velraya spread her wings. The colonists gasped and stepped back as the dragon crouched, preparing to launch. Katie stood her ground even as the displaced air whipped her hair around her face. "Thank you," Katie called out. "For trusting me. For letting me help." "No," Velraya's voice was firm in her mind. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. For caring when caring made no sense. I will carry this debt until the stars grow cold." With a powerful leap that shook the ground, Velraya launched herself into the sky. Her wings beat once, twice, carrying her higher with each stroke. Katie watched as the dragon climbed toward the clouds, becoming smaller and smaller, until she was just a dark speck against the blue. Then she was gone, disappearing into the upper atmosphere and beyond. Katie stood there long after the crowds dispersed, one hand pressed against her chest, feeling the warmth of the scale mark on her palm. Life returned to normal. Or as normal as it could be on a frontier colony. Katie threw herself back into her work with renewed energy. She published papers about Drakari biology that made waves throughout the scientific community. She developed new treatment protocols for exotic species. Her reputation grew. Within a year, she was offered the position of Director of Xenobiology for all human colonies in the sector. It was a massive promotion with responsibilities that stretched across 15 worlds. Katie accepted, knowing that Lily would have been proud. 3 years passed. Katie barely noticed them go by. There were always new challenges, new species to study, new medical emergencies to handle. She traveled from colony to colony, training staff, setting up new facilities, building bridges between humans and the dozens of alien species they encountered. The scale mark never faded. Sometimes, late at night in her quarters, Katie would trace its outline and feel that distant warmth. Velraya was out there somewhere, traveling the dark spaces between stars. And Katie was here, building something meaningful. The galaxy still saw humans as minor players. They were allowed to trade, allowed to establish colonies, but they weren't taken seriously. The Galactic Council made decisions without consulting Earth. Other species viewed human space as a backwater, safe, friendly, but ultimately unimportant. Katie had grown used to it. Humanity would prove itself eventually. They just needed time. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, alarms started blaring across New Horizon. Katie was in her office reviewing supply reports when her communicator exploded with emergency signals. Not just from New Horizon but from 12 different colonies simultaneously. On her screen she saw the ships. Hundreds of them appearing out of nowhere. Sleek, dark vessels that moved with predatory grace. The VRNN collective had arrived and they weren't here to talk. The invasion had begun. The VRNN collective struck without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Katie was reviewing medical supply reports when every alarm in New Horizon started screaming at once. Within seconds, her communicator lit up with emergency broadcasts from 12 different human colonies. They were all under attack simultaneously. The VRYNN were a hive mind species. Thousands of individuals connected by one central consciousness. They didn't negotiate. They didn't warn. They simply took what they wanted, and right now they wanted human colony worlds. Their fleet was massive, easily 10 times larger than humanity's scattered defense forces. Katie rushed to the command center, where holographic displays showed the nightmare unfolding. Dark ships swarmed around New Horizon like angry insects. The colony's defense grid was firing everything it had, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. How long do we have? Katie asked the tactical officer. The young man's hands shook as he worked his console. Hours? Maybe less. They're hitting us from every angle. Outside, Katie could see human fighters making desperate runs against the VRNN vessels. Small ships against our armada. It was suicide, but they did it anyway, buying time for civilians to reach the shelters. Katie watched as one fighter exploded in a ball of fire. Then another. The pilots never hesitated. Within 2 hours, New Horizon's orbital defenses were gone. The VRNN began their descent. Katie converted the medical center into an emergency triage facility. Wounded soldiers and civilians flooded in, burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds. Her staff worked frantically, but there were too many patients and not enough hands. Blood covered the floors. The smell of smoke filled the air. Director Reed, someone shouted. We're getting reports that the Galactic Council has been contacted. They're debating whether to intervene. Katie's jaw clenched. Debating. While people died, alien bureaucrats were debating. The truth was harsh but simple. Humanity wasn't important enough to risk war over. The Council saw them as useful traders, nothing more. If helping humans meant angering the VRYNN collective, most species would simply let humanity fall. It was practical. It was logical. It was also sickening. 3 days passed in a blur of chaos. Katie barely slept. The VRYNN forces pushed closer with each hour. Human soldiers fought building by building, street by street. Every block cost them lives they couldn't afford to lose. The evacuation ships managed to get maybe 30% of the civilians off-world before VRYNN fighters shot down the launch corridors. The rest were trapped. Katie kept working. She set broken bones. She treated burns. She held the hands of dying soldiers who whispered messages for families they'd never see again. And all the while the Galactic Council debated. On the third day, Colonel Ryan Morrison stumbled into the medical center. His uniform was torn and bloodied. Burn marks crossed his face. He'd been leading the defense at the northern perimeter. Doc, he said, his voice hoarse. You need to evacuate. No. We're down to our last 2 defensive positions. They're breaking through the final perimeter. Katie looked around the medical center. 50 patients lay on beds and gurneys. Some were stable enough to move. Others weren't. She'd been offered a spot on the last transport off-world 6 times. She'd refused every time. Not while I still have patience, Katie said firmly, turning back to the soldier whose leg she was splinting. Katie, please. Ryan grabbed her shoulder. There's nothing more you can do here. When the VRNN breached the city center, they won't take prisoners. You know what they do to conquered populations. She did know. The VRNN didn't occupy worlds, they harvested them. Resources, technology, and anyone unlucky enough to be left behind. Then we hold the line, Katie said quietly. That's what we do. That's what humans do. An explosion rocked the building. Closer than before. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Through the windows, Katie could see black smoke rising from the next block over. The sound of energy weapons echoed through the streets. Ryan's communicator crackled. Colonel, they're in the city. VRYNN ground forces have breached the eastern wall. All units fall back to, the transmission cut off in a burst of static. Katie's patients looked at her with fear in their eyes. Some tried to get up, preparing to run. But where could they go? The city was surrounded. The skies were filled with enemy ships. This was the end. Katie felt the scale mark on her palm. It had been warm for 3 years, a constant comfort, a reminder that she had a friend out there among the stars. But now it burned. Actually burned like touching hot metal. She gasped, pressing her hand against her chest. Was this Velrea's way of saying goodbye? Was the dragon feeling Katie's fear across the vast distance of space? Another explosion, closer still. The building shook. Medical equipment crashed to the floor. Someone screamed. Through the smoke and chaos, Katie could hear something new, the sound of VRNN soldiers, their weapons charging, their inhuman voices calling to each other as they swept through the streets. Katie looked up at the smoke-filled sky through the shattered windows. In her mind, she thought of Velrea flying free among the stars, safe and far from this carnage. "I hope you're somewhere safe," Katie whispered. "I hope you never see what they did to us." The ceiling exploded above her. Katie braced for death as the ceiling exploded. Debris rained down around her. Patients screamed. Colonel Ryan threw himself over a wounded soldier, shielding them from the blast. Katie squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. But what descended through the smoke and fire was not a VRNN weapon. Velrea crashed through the roof like a meteor made of black flame and pure rage. Her obsidian scales blazed with an inner light Katie had never seen before. The dragon's roar shook the entire building, so loud and fierce that every VRNN soldier within a mile froze in their tracks. Katie stared up in disbelief. Velrea? But the dragon wasn't alone. Through the hole in the ceiling, Katie saw the sky darken. Not with smoke or ships but with shapes. Hundreds of them. Dragons of every color, crimson, gold, silver, emerald, filled the air above New Horizon. Their wings blotted out the sun. The Drakari had come. All of them. The galaxy hadn't seen the dragon kind united in over 10,000 years. They were legends, myths, stories told to children. Most species believed they'd gone extinct or retreated to some distant corner of the universe. But they were here now and they were absolutely furious. Velrea's voice thundered through Katie's mind, so powerful it brought her to her knees. "You honored my children. Now I honor yours." What happened next would be recorded in every history book across the galaxy. The Drakari fell upon the VRNN fleet like ancient gods delivering judgment. Plasma breath turned VRNN warships into molten slag. Telekinetic force crushed vessels like tin cans. Energy weapons that could level cities bounced harmlessly off dragon scales. The VRNN had numbers. The Drakari had power that made modern technology look like children's toys. Katie stumbled to the shattered window and watched in awe. A massive crimson dragon grabbed a VRNN cruiser with its claws and simply tore it in half. A golden dragon breathed a stream of white-hot fire that cut through 3 enemy ships in a single sweep. The VRNN fired everything they had, but it was useless. This wasn't a battle. This was extermination. Colonel Ryan stood beside Katie, his mouth hanging open. What are they?" "Their family," Katie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Within an hour, the VRNN fleet was scattered, broken, fleeing. Those ships that could still fly ran for the jump points, desperate to escape. The Drakari pursued them relentlessly, making sure every single VRNN vessel left human space. The message was clear: never return. Katie ran outside into the smoke-filled streets. All around her, people emerged from shelters and buildings, staring up at the sky in wonder. Children pointed at the dragons circling overhead. Soldiers who'd been fighting for 3 days straight fell to their knees and wept with relief. The Galactic Council ships finally arrived, their peacekeeping force, jumping into the system fashionably late. Katie could only imagine the shock on their faces. They'd expected to find human colonies destroyed, maybe already under VRNN control. Instead they found victory. And hovering protectively over every human world were hundreds of Drakari, creatures they thought were extinct. Velrea landed in the central plaza, her massive form crushing abandoned vehicles beneath her weight. Katie ran toward her, ignoring the pain in her ribs, the cuts on her arms, the exhaustion that made every step agony. She threw her arms around the dragon's neck as far as they would reach. "You came," Katie sobbed. "You actually came. Did you think I would not?" Velrea's mental voice was gentle now, all the rage burned away. "We are family. Family protects each other." The dragon lowered her massive head, touching her snout to Katie's forehead with impossible tenderness. Around them, the other Drakari landed, forming a protective circle. Katie had never felt safer in her entire life. Then Velrea did something that shocked everyone watching. She raised her head and spoke, not just to Katie but on every communication frequency simultaneously. Every ship in orbit, every colony, every member of the Galactic Council fleet heard her voice. "The galaxy has made a mistake," Velrea's words rang with authority that made stars tremble. You thought humans were weak. You dismissed them as soft, emotional, prey animals playing at civilization. You let them die while you debated. But you were wrong. Katie saw the council ships hovering uncertainly in orbit, their representatives probably panicking. One human showed mercy to a grieving mother when profit and logic said to let me die, Velrea continued. She gave everything to save a stranger. This is not weakness. This is a strength your species have forgotten. Therefore, I declare before the galaxy, humanity is under Drakari protection. Any who harm them answer to us. We have spoken. The silence that followed was deafening. Katie could see alien representatives on the view screens, their faces pale with shock. The VRNN collective transmitted an immediate surrender and plea for peace. Within minutes, humanity was offered a full seat on the Galactic Council. Not as junior members. As equals. The other dragons began departing, returning to the deep spaces they called home. But Velrea remained. As dawn broke over the ruins of New Horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the dragon reached into a pouch on her side and pulled out something Katie never expected to see again. An egg. A single Drakari egg about the size of a basketball, covered in midnight black scales that shimmered with inner light. This is my last, Velrea said softly, placing it in Katie's trembling hands. I thought I would never lay another after my children died. But life surprises us. Raise this one with your kind. Not as servants but as family. As you showed me. Katie cradled the egg, feeling its warmth, feeling the tiny heartbeat inside. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, Velrea replied. You saved a mother. That mother saved your species. This is the way of my kind. We never forget. We never abandon those we love. With a final touch of her snout to Katie's forehead, Velrea spread her wings and launched herself skyward. Katie watched until the dragon was just a speck against the rising sun, then disappeared entirely. Around her, New Horizon began to rebuild. But everything had changed. Humanity was no longer dismissed, no longer ignored. They had proven that compassion wasn't weakness, it was the strongest force in the universe. And in her arms, Katie held the future, a tiny heartbeat that connected two species forever.